Have you ever wondered who actually sets the rules for what we are allowed to debate?
Hmm.
And I don't mean, who wins the argument on a Sunday morning talk show or who gets the most engagement on social media. I mean the invisible boundary lines that dictate what is even considered an acceptable topic to bring up in the first place.
Right, the stuff you can't even say out loud.
Exactly. The subtle, quiet mechanics that determine what is thinkable for a society and what is totally off limits.
It's a really compelling question because, well, we operate under this assumption that those boundaries form naturally.
Hmm.
We like to believe that in a functioning democracy, the marketplace of ideas just organically sifts the good arguments from the bad ones, right? Through open friction.
Yeah, we think of it as this chaotic, democratic forum, but what if it's not organic at all? What if that marketplace is heavily curated by an architecture you can't even see?
That is the core of what we're looking at today.
Right. So we are diving into a genuinely gripping investigation. This was published on April 19th, 2026, by an author who goes by Danny Wrights, and it unpacks the explosive findings of a book called Hidden Republic.
Yes, and the subject here is what the author refers to as South Korea's hidden state.
The hidden state.
Yeah, it's this alleged parallel power structure that supposedly shapes the country's entire political reality from the shadows.
And look, for you listening, we know these sources touch on some incredibly explosive, highly polarized political claims, and they involve both left-wing and right-wing ideologies in South Korea.
Extremely polarized.
Right. So we just want to be clear up front. We aren't here to pick sides or tell you what to believe about Korean politics.
No, not at all.
Our mission today is just to act as your guides.
Yeah.
Walking you through the fascinating, really complex blueprints this investigation has laid out.
Because we are essentially dissecting the mechanics of an argument here.
Yeah.
And the author traces the exposure of these mechanics back to a very specific, undeniable event.
Yeah.
It wasn't uncovered by a whistleblower or like a leaked memo. It revealed itself during what the source describes as an invisible civil war.
An invisible civil war. Wow.
And it lasted for 58 days in the autumn of 1998.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to set the scene for the listener because the stakes here are just massive. It's October 19th, 1998.
Right.
South Korea has recently gone through this monumental shift. The newly elected president, Kim Dae-jung, has just taken power.
Right. A huge moment for the country.
Exactly. And then a conservative investigative magazine called Monthly Chosun publishes a massive cover story. And the target of this piece is a man named Choi Jang-jip. So who was he and why was he in the crosshairs?
Well, Choi Jang-jip was a prominent political scientist from Korea University, but more importantly, he had just been appointed by President Kim Dae-jung to chair the Presidential Policy Planning Committee.
Which, I mean, that sounds like a dry bureaucratic title.
Right, it does.
Yeah.
But in reality, that is an incredibly powerful, unelected role. You are essentially the architect of the president's long-term policy agenda.
You're drawing the map for the entire administration.
Spot on. Which explains the gravity of the accusations. The Monthly Chosun article accused Professor Choi of fundamentally reframing the history of the Korean War in his academic writings,
Okay.
and specifically by utilizing historiography borrowed directly from North Korea.
Whoa.
Yeah. The magazine laid out what the investigation calls the 7 points of combat, 7 specific historical propositions they claimed Choi was pushing.
And these propositions were, they were radioactive.
Highly.
For example, the magazine pointed out that his work labeled the South Korean Workers' Party, the Namrodang, which was a communist organization, as a, quote, nationalist force.
Right.
And perhaps most controversially, they highlighted that Choi's work debated whether North Korean founder Kim Il-sung bore sole responsibility for initiating the war.
Which is a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah. And they claimed he was referring to the Korean War as a war of national liberation, which is adopting North Korean terminology.
We really need to pause on that specific phrase.
Yeah.
Because to an outsider, it might just sound like academic semantics, right?
Right. Just professors arguing over words.
Exactly. But if you call the Korean War a war of national liberation, you aren't just using a different label. You are adopting North Korea's explicit justification for the war.
Wow.
It implies that the United States and South Korea were imperial occupiers, and that Kim Il-sung's invasion was a righteous crusade for freedom. It completely flips the moral architecture of the state.
Okay, but hold on, I'm stuck on something here. I get that the phrasing is deeply controversial.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, this was an academic's history book. A magazine writes a hit piece about a professor's footnotes. It's like someone accidentally tripping a laser alarm in a highly secure, invisible museum.
That's a great analogy.
But how does that trigger a 58-day national crisis? Isn't this just ivory tower squabbling? Why did this matter so much to the people in power?
Well, that is the crux of the entire investigation. You have to look beneath the surface of the academic language. This wasn't a debate about history. It was a battle over sovereign legitimacy.
Sovereign legitimacy.
Right. If a nation cannot agree on who started its defining war, the conflict that literally split the peninsula in half and cost millions of lives, it cannot agree on who has the moral authority to govern it today.
Wow, okay. That puts it in perspective.
Yeah. The author of Hidden Republic argues that this alleged hidden state fights on the terrain of history books long before it ever fights on the terrain of ballots. If you can change the foundational narrative of the country, you change the parameters of every political debate that follows.
So whoever controls the past controls the future.
Exactly.
That makes the reaction from the system make a lot more sense. Because if the magazine thought exposing this would force Choi to just, quietly step down, they severely miscalculated.
Oh, massively.
The system didn't just ignore the article, it completely mobilized against it. And the source documents what I can only describe as a biological immune system swarming a virus.
The speed and the scale of the response were entirely unprecedented. I mean, within 48 hours of the magazine hitting the stands, dozens of organizations had issued formal statements condemning the article.
Within 48 hours,
Yeah.
that is incredibly fast. And over the course of those 58 days, more than 60 different organizations mobilized. We're talking about the Min Beyond Lawyers Group, massive labor federations, religious councils, and even the National Association of Retired Generals.
It was sweeping.
Yeah, all of them acting in concert, demanding the magazine stop its reporting. Meanwhile, what was the Blue House, the presidential residence, doing?
They were officially claiming there was, quote, no problem whatsoever.
Unbelievable.
It was a synchronized wave of pressure from every corner of civil society. But the immune response didn't stop at angry public statements. The legal machinery activated. On November 11th, 1998, a judge at the Seoul District Court named Shin Young-kil took an extraordinary step. He ordered the November issue of Monthly Chosun to be halted entirely and removed from circulation on the grounds of defamation.
A civil court judge literally banned a major political magazine from being read by the public.
This just pulled it right off the shelf.
And it didn't end there. 3 days later, on November 14th, that same injunction hit Chosun Ilbo, which is the nation's largest newspaper.
It's staggering.
And then right in the middle of all this, on November 13th, something surreal happened. The Central Committee of the North Korean Journalists Union actually issued a statement from Pyongyang throwing their official support behind Professor Choi and condemning the South Korean magazine.
Which adds an entirely new cross-border dimension to the controversy.
Right.
But if we focus purely on the domestic mobilization, it raises a massive logistical question.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if I'm reading this investigation, my immediate thought is, how on earth do you coordinate 60 different, seemingly independent organizations in 72 hours?
Right, how does that actually happen?
Yeah. This isn't some smoky room, cartoonish conspiracy where a dozen guys in suits are pulling levers around a mahogany table. There is a real infrastructure here. So where did it come from?
Well, the investigation traces the circuitry back to the 1980s, specifically to the underground student movements that fought against South Korea's military dictatorship at the time.
Okay.
The source points to 3 specific ideological lineages, the Zappa, the NL, and the PD factions.
Wait, NL and PD. For the listener who isn't steeped in 1980s Korean student politics, what do those acronyms actually stand for?
It's crucial context. NL stands for National Liberation. This faction was fiercely anti-imperialist, focused on reunification, and often deeply sympathetic to North Korea.
Got it.
PD stands for People's Democracy, which was more aligned with traditional Marxist class struggle and labor rights.
And the third one?
Then you have the Jusapa. That was a dominant subgroup within the NL faction that literally studied and adopted Juche.
Juche. That's North Korea's state ideology of self-reliance, right?
Yes.
So these were radical, intensely ideological, highly organized underground networks.
They had to be organized to survive the crackdowns of the 1980s.
Sure.
But as the investigation notes, by the mid-1990s, South Korea had democratized. The military dictators were gone. And the raw ideological intensity of those underground movements kind of ran out of steam because their primary enemy had vanished.
Right. The mission was over.
But the cadres, the thousands of highly organized individuals who built those networks, they didn't just disappear. As the author puts it, they simply changed address.
Changed address. They moved from the political wilderness into the mainstream. They got jobs. They became professors, lawyers, labor union leaders, and heads of civil society groups.
Precisely. And when Kim Dae-jung won the presidency in 1997, marking the first peaceful transfer of power to the liberal opposition in decades, those former student radicals finally felt secure enough to start stretching their limbs.
Because they were now safely inside the system.
Yes. So when the monthly Chosen article tripped the alarm in 1998, the coordination didn't require a smoky room. The network was already in place, occupying key nodes across society. They just activated their old phone trees.
Wow. You know, there is a line in the source material that genuinely gave me chills. It says, democracies die in the space between what is formally legal and what is socially permissible.
It's a haunting thought.
Think about it. The court injunction, formally legal. The 60 public statement, formally legal. The labor union pressure, legal. But the combined, crushing weight of it completely destroyed the space where a journalist could ask a valid question about an unelected official's published work.
It's an apparatus designed to manufacture conformity. And this leads us to the core thesis of the article, how this kind of ideological suppression translates directly into rigged democratic outcomes.
Rigged outcomes.
Right. The author uses the term electoral corruption, but they go out of their way to clarify they aren't talking about ballot stuffing or hacked voting machines.
Right. It's what the author calls upstream corruption. The idea is that if you wait until election day to rig the vote, you're already way too late. The real power lies in the manufacture of the permissible.
Pre-electoral conditioning.
Yeah. I like to think of it like this. It's like walking into a grocery store thinking you're in a free market economy with endless choices, but you don't realize that a single entity secretly bought out all the suppliers, the trucking companies, and the shelf stockers 3 years ago.
Oh, that's good.
So by the time you walk down the aisle, only one brand of cereal is ever going to be available to you. You have the illusion of choice, but the outcome was engineered upstream.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. Because if a hidden architecture has the capacity to mobilize 60 organizations in 72 hours to destroy the credibility of a single magazine article,
Yeah.
it has the exact same capacity to mobilize against a political candidate, a policy proposal, or an investigative journalist during an election cycle. The terrain of the election is shaped long before the voters arrive.
And to prove just how tightly controlled this network really was, the investigation highlights this dramatic event that happened just a few months after the magazine ban, in June 1999. It involves a man named Kim Young-hwan,
Also known by his movement code name, Gang-keel, which translates to steal. For anyone studying this era, this is a watershed moment.
To understand the gravity of what happens next, you have to know who Gang-keel was. He wasn't just a foot soldier in the 1980s student movements. He was the intellectual father of the entire Jusapa movement.
The absolute core of it.
Right. This is a man who had personally traveled to North Korea. He literally had a secret submarine rendezvous with Kim Il-sung himself.
Yeah, that's not a metaphor. He actually did that.
He was the ideological bedrock for thousands of activists.
And in June 1999, he defected.
Wow.
He didn't defect geographically. He was already in the South, but he defected ideologically. Kim Young-won published a stunning public declaration completely repudiating the Kim Jong-il regime.
Which must have been an intellectual earthquake for the movement.
Oh, absolutely.
The author of Hidden Republic was actually a young reporter covering this exact story at the time. And right after Gang-keel's declaration was published, the reporter called the editorial board of the main ideological journal affiliated with the movement to get their response.
Right.
He assumed they would be furiously drafting a rebuttal, but nobody answered the phones.
He quickly discovered that the entire staff had vanished. They literally abandoned their desks and walked out of the office rather than engage with the story.
It's like a computer system that encounters a fatal error it simply cannot process, so it just yanks its own power cord out of the wall.
Exactly.
But I have to ask you about the psychology here. This is a movement built on decades of intense, rigorous ideological study. If you profoundly disagree with your founder's defection, don't you sit down and write a massive counter-essay? Don't you debate him? Why just disappear?
Well, because that reaction reveals the true nature of the hidden state. It proves that this is a coordinated network focused on power, not a debating society focused on truth.
Ah, I see.
In a true intellectual movement, a defection sparks debate. But in an apparatus that relies on absolute universal conformity to project its power, A high-profile defection from your core leader is an existential threat.
There's no script for how to respond to it.
None. You cannot debate the founder of your ideology without acknowledging to your followers that the ideology itself is up for debate.
Which ruins the illusion.
Right. And the entire purpose of the manufacture of the permissible is to ensure certain foundational things are never debated. So, the only viable system-preserving response for the network was to sever communication entirely. You just shut the journal down.
It paints a picture of a structure that is simultaneously terrifyingly powerful and incredibly brittle.
It really does.
But let's zoom out here. We are talking about events in South Korea in 1998 and 1999. Why is this April 2026 investigation insisting that a 30-year-old Korean political drama is a critical, urgent issue for the rest of the world right now?
Because South Korea is not a peripheral nation. It is the 10th largest economy in the world. It is a vital U.S. treaty ally, currently hosting 28,500 American troops.
Right.
It is the absolute anchor of the Indo-Pacific strategy, particularly in the context of the ongoing Sino-American competition. If you're playing a high-stakes geopolitical game, South Korea is a load-bearing pillar of the board.
So what does this all mean? The source argues that a structural weakness in a load-bearing allied democracy is functionally a structural weakness for the entire Western alliance.
Exactly. And the investigation lays out 3 specific reasons why this 1998 playbook matters globally today.
Okay, let's hear them.
The first reason is that South Korea serves as a template. The operational playbook we just walked through, synchronized statements from seemingly disparate groups, the aggressive legal harassment of critical media, the cross-border alignment with a hostile regime's propaganda, it isn't isolated to Seoul.
It's happening elsewhere.
Yeah, the author notes that this exact same method of operation has since been observed in Eastern Europe, in Latin America, and in other democracies experiencing deep polarization.
So it's an early warning system. If you want to know how a parallel architecture secretly curates a democracy, the 1998 incident is the textbook.
Precisely. Now, the second reason is that this represents a severe test of institutional resilience. Think back to Judge Shin Young-kil granting that civil injunction against Monthly Chosun.
Banning the magazine.
Right. When a judiciary in a Western allied democracy is willing to preemptively suppress political journalism to appease public pressure, it crosses a deeply dangerous line.
For you listening to this, I really want you to think about that. How secure are the democratic institutions in your own backyard if a single civil court order can ban a political magazine from even being read by the public?
It's chilling thought.
It sets a terrifying precedent that the legal system can be used not to protect free speech, but to enforce the boundaries of the permissible.
Which brings us to the third, and perhaps most urgent, global implication. The investigation stresses that this is not historical trivia. It is a live operation.
Meaning the people involved didn't just retire after the 90s.
Far from it. The source points out that the networks exposed in the 1998 immune response simply continued to age into the mainstream.
Wow.
The former underground student radicals who coordinated that 58-day suppression campaign, they are now sitting National Assembly members. They are cabinet ministers, municipal mayors, and university presidents. They are the establishment.
The author of Hidden Republic makes this chilling observation. They argue that the great tragedy of the 1998 controversy wasn't just that the invisible civil war happened, but that it was ultimately metabolized into the system.
Yes. It became the new normal.
Right.
Every election in South Korea since 1998, according to the investigation, has been conducted on ground that was preloaded by this architecture. The authoritarian impulse wasn't rejected by the democratic system. It was digested and turned into everyday political energy.
That is the real challenge the investigation leaves us with. If an allied democracy can have its terms of debate secretly captured by a highly coordinated network operating just beneath the surface, we have to ask ourselves where else this structural weakness exists.
It forces us to look past the superficial noise of daily politics. You know, the politicians yelling at each other on TV.
Right.
And examine the quiet structural foundations of how a society actually decides what is true.
Okay, let's take a breath and recap the journey we've been on today. We started by unpacking this intense investigation by Danny Wrights into the findings of the Hidden Republic. We looked at the autumn of 1998, the 58-day invisible civil war triggered by Monthly Chosun, questioning the historical narrative of Choi Jang-jip, a powerful unelected official.
And we examined the rapid immune system-like response of over 60 organizations, the unprecedented court injunction banning the magazine, and the haunting story of the Jusapa Journal staff abandoning their desks rather than confront the defection of their founding father, Kim Young-kwan.
Yeah. And we explored this concept of upstream electoral corruption, the idea that by manufacturing what is socially permissible to debate, you preload the outcome of elections before anyone even walks into a voting booth.
It's a heavy concept.
It is. And again, I want to reiterate, as your guides on this deep dive, we are simply the messengers. We are sharing the fascinating geopolitical and historical claims laid out in this source material. We aren't endorsing them or telling you how to vote. We just want you to see the blueprints.
The mechanics of how the system reacted in 1998 are undeniably gripping, regardless of your political leaning.
They really are. And that leaves me with a final provocative thought that I want you to mull over as you go about your day.
Oh, let's hear it.
So the investigation warned that the radical student movements of the 1980s moved from the underground into the mainstream institutions of the 1990s to shape the narrative. They successfully changed address.
Right.
But if the architecture of a society's debate is always built by the victors of the last ideological war, who is quietly building the architecture for the next generation right now.
Well, the battleground has fundamentally changed since 1998.
Exactly. Perhaps the coordination isn't happening in underground student meetings or labor union halls or university faculty lounges anymore. Perhaps the new architecture is being built in digital spaces, within platform content policies, and in the algorithms you interact with every single day.
That's entirely possible.
The invisible code that decides what appears in your feed, what gets suppressed, and what goes viral. Who is manufacturing your permissible right now?
The invisible boundaries are always being drawn. The question is whether you can see them.
So the next time you find yourself wondering who sets the rules for what you're allowed to debate, you might want to look closely at the invisible architecture right beneath your feet. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay intensely curious, keep questioning the boundaries, and we'll see you next time.